Okay, I'd like to acknowledge that this meeting is being held on the traditional lands of the Cammeraygal people and pay my respect to elders both past and present. Thank you everybody for coming along tonight, all the participants and our candidates. What we're going to do, as I mentioned before, is that there'll be a 5-minute presentation from each candidate, and then afterwards we'll do a Q&A session. What we would like you to do is to put your questions in the chat, and then once you've done that, we will then take them and I'll ask them as moderator. Because of time constraints, please appreciate that we can probably only get to one question per person, and if we miss your question, I'm so sorry, but unfortunately we do only have a limited period of time. So without further ado, one last thing is, could you please ensure that you're respectful and that you don't put comments in the chat, just put questions. So say question 4 and then your question. I really want this to be a respectful forum. Anyone who puts their head up to run for public office should be applauded. I know I couldn't do it, and so it'd be great if everyone is respectful. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Penny to tell us a little bit about herself.
Thank you, Jackie, and thanks for giving us the opportunity to speak to the community like this. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we Zoom from, and I'm currently on Wallumaddigal land in East Ryde. My name is Penny Patterson. I live in East Ryde with my husband and my 2 teenage boys. We've been here for 16 years. And as you probably know, this where I live, my ward up here, and I'm a councillor, and my ward up here takes up a big part of the Cove Electorate. So I've been serving the electorate for some time now, for almost 6 years. A little bit about me. My upbringing is very different to what my boys have had. I was born into a single parent family in public housing at Ermington, and we moved around Sydney a lot as my mum was looking for affordable housing for us to live in. I studied theatre at NSW, and I became a performer working in film, television, theatre and education, and radio after some study at AFTRS, as well as jobs in production and some freelance writing. In addition, I've been a company board director at the Griffin Theatre Company and Northside Radio in Chatswood. I was a regular guest panellist on ABC Radio for a number of years and volunteered at Northside Radio for over a decade, hosting a weekly arts music program. And I've been on Ryde Council since 2017. I've chaired renewable energy, works and bushland and environment committees. I've represented our region as vice president of NESROC, vice chair of the Parramatta River Catchment Group to make our river swimmable again. I'm on the board of Local Government New South Wales and the Australian Local Government Women's Association. And I also sit on the Ryde Hunters Hill Domestic and Family Violence Committee, among other things. A few other things about me. As you can hear, I'm passionate about the arts, but very passionate about climate change and protecting the environment. I'm a New South Wales organiser for LEAN, the Labour Environment Action Network, who run grassroots campaigns inside the party for more progressive policy. What else can I tell you? I'm a certified wildlife rescuer and carer. And I drive the cheapest fully electric vehicle on the market, which I love. So that's a bit about me. I'll tell you a little bit about our policies. Obviously, the Labor Party, you've probably heard quite a bit of this, our Fresh Start plan. Labor will rebuild and retain our health workforce. We will stop nurses leaving our hospitals. We will abolish the wage cap, introduce enforceable minimum safe staffing levels in our hospitals, adding 1,200 nurses and midwives. We'll expand hospital capacity and deliver over 600 new hospital beds and a new hospital, a 300-bed hospital. Affordable housing is very important to us in this plan. We'll make good sustainable housing attainable for buyers and renters with a comprehensive plan to address housing supply. Introducing a target of 30% affordable social and universal housing on surplus public land. We'll target transport land holdings which are close to public transport hubs, which is obviously very important. We'll help first home buyers. Labor will abolish the stamp duty outright for first home buyers who are buying a home up to $800,000, while offering concessional rates to first home buyers who are buying up to $1 million. And we will deliver a fairer deal for renters, establishing a rental commissioner who will advocate and will be a voice for renters by working closely with government and consumer affairs. So they'll address, you know, all those unfair rental practices, like, you know, no fault evictions and, you know, rental bidding, but also we'll introduce affordable bond scheme, which I think is important for people not to lose, if they're losing income as they're moving around. We're going to fix transport. We've been at bus stops every morning, and we can see very frustrated passengers waiting for their buses, and we're going to do that. We'll invest in better public transport, including an end to privatisation of these services. We'll build trains, buses and ferries and light rail right here in New South Wales. We are going to introduce somebody who will establish an industry task force to assess a recent report and the recommendations in that report, to improve the bus services for passengers in New South Wales. And also we'll stop selling our motorways to private for-profit companies and introduce the $60 a week toll cap to reduce the burden on the family budget. Education, of course, we've got teachers leaving the profession. We will reduce the amount of administration they're required to do by 5 hours a week. We will abolish the wage cap in the public sector, making sure that they are compensated for the very important role that they have in our schools. We'll convert 10,000 temporary teachers to permanent roles. Our education sector has been heavily casualised, and those people should have full-time positions.
Really, that's the 5 minutes. So if you want to sum up, that'd be great.
All right. Well, just one more thing. We will abolish the failed $13.5 million recruitment beyond New South Wales program, which has only yielded 3 teachers. So that's enough for me. I do have lots more policy, and I encourage you all to go and have a look at our Fresh Start plan. There's a lot more detail, and you can delve right down into it. Thank you.
Penny, if you want to put the link to that in the chat, that would be great. And anybody else, any of the other candidates who want to put a link to their policies in the chat, feel free to do so. Okay, our next presenter is Heather, who is representing the Greens Party. So Heather, go for it. You need to unmute. Just hit any button.
Mute. Right.
There you go.
Okay, good. Good evening, everybody. And I'm on beautiful Watermatical land in Boronia Park, not far from the Great North Walk. I acknowledge pay my respects to the elders and senior citizens of the local Aboriginal community and upcoming locals. I take my hat off to them for the suffering that they've endured, and I notice that they are not ceding their land, over which they claim sovereignty. It's a matter for negotiation with the forthcoming voice and treaties. So it's very much in the forefront of our minds at the moment, and I pay my respects to them. My personal background, I'm a former federal public prosecutor for 26 years, from which I retired in 2016. Before that, I was a solicitor in big firms and in law reform. I was also born in Sydney, Bernie Dropwood Point near the bush, and I'm a bush carer with the local bush care groups. I'm also a bush regenerator over at Huntley's Point, where my husband and I have been planting a small forest, which you can see when you're coming across Tarban Bridge. Over to the left there before you hit Gladesville Bridge, and I'm a cellist with the Balmain Sinfonia, which is, you know, like all arts organisations, struggling to get money. And I'm the grandmother of a 1-year-old who we all adore, of course. So it's busy. However, I found some time to do this campaign for the Greens because I'm committed to the Greens policies, which are just so important, because we have climate change underwriting every single aspect of our society at the moment. The harm which it is doing, global warming is doing to everything, every aspect of our lives, is obvious. We've seen our own particular disasters, and Australia is at the forefront of climate change disasters. We're one of the most vulnerable countries in terms of fire and flood. Not that we're alone, of course. Pakistan had about half of its country covered with floods and hundreds of millions of people displaced recently. It's a disaster worldwide. Wherever you look, there's serious problems with the environment. So we clearly need to stop the source of this problem, which is greenhouse gases, namely carbon dioxide emitted by fossil fuel industries and methane also emitted by fossil fuel industries and other sources. So we really need to get cracking. The science behind this is clear, and the Greens are very much a science-based party. We clearly just rely upon what the international experts tell us. International Panel on Climate Change keeps on delivering updated reports which further cement the serious problems we face. This is not just a matter of mitigation. We have to stop it at source. We have to stop emissions. But what is New South Wales doing? New South Wales has approved 26 coal and gas projects since the Paris Climate Change Agreement in 2015. It's as if it doesn't exist. We just stick our heads in the sand here. The Liberal and National parties just seem to want to keep on developing anything much, you know, buildings, coal, seam gas, coal mines, whatever. Don't worry about the Great Artesian Basin, which is at huge risk from contamination from coal fracking, coal gas fracking. So we have a party, we have a government which is basically in denial, is being paid by the big developers of the fossil fuel industries. The Greens take no money from fossil fuel industries or from gambling or from any harmful industries. We're not influenced by anything other than science. So we're here to tell you that we need to get going and that existing policy is just woefully out of date. Matt Keane's been trying to do things, but it's not enough. Labor Party is trying to do things, but it's also not enough. We need to basically invest in renewable energy fast, very fast. We have to get New South Wales fueled entirely by renewable electricity generation as a matter of urgent priority, and we should aim to be powered by 100% renewable electricity by 2030. We must reach 75% emissions reductions on 2005 levels by 2030 and net zero emissions by 2035 if we have any chance of keeping global warming under 1.5 degrees, which probably isn't possible because of the same factors I've just pointed to: denial, lack of action, dominant industries having the say in the mouths of governments and in the ears of governments and just trying to tune things their way, which leads me to development, which is basically what this government's all about. It's development at all costs. Don't worry about nature. Don't worry about whatever. The 2016 Biodiversity Conservation Act is a joke. It was all about offsets and just accounting for them. Of course, there aren't enough offsets to accommodate all of that damage that's being done. The Environmental Planning Assessment Act's been gutted of any community participation. There are so many ways in which the minister can basically do what he likes, calling in proposals, naming them as state significant development, naming them as critical state infrastructure. There's all sorts of ways the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act has been changed to basically neuter it in terms of community participation. When you look up the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act for compulsory community participation, what does it say? Nothing other than the amounts of time, the number of days that proposals have got to be exhibited. That's it. There are no third-party rights to litigate. There's no council. Councils can't even do much these days.
Thank you, Heather. If you'd like to just sum up, that'd be great.
All right. So we have a government that basically isn't coping with the world as it is. It's just living in denial. It's also just proceeding apace with developers, letting them do what they want. It's a developer-run state, and we're here to try to change that. Thank you.
So much, Heather. Our next speaker is Victoria Davidson, who is an independent.
Hi, everybody. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of this land on which we meet tonight and pay respects to elders past and present. I am Victoria Davidson, Community Independent Candidate for Lane Cove for this March New South Wales election. A bit of background about me. I am a resident of Lane Cove. My husband and I moved here 15 years ago. We have 3 children. We have a business in Lane Cove. We've had a business in Lane Cove since 2000. A lawyer by training. 12 years ago, I left legal practice to run our business. I'm also a mediator. And for 5 years, whilst the children were at Lane Cove Public School, I ran the local canteen, or the canteen at the school. So I understand about politics. Why am I here? I mean, why would somebody like myself choose to stand up for this? It's a really good question, and that people keep asking. And I'll be honest, I have never been a member of a political party, and I have never actually had any political ambition. I am not a political fanatic, and I am not a policy wonk. I am a concerned member of our community. I believe that our voice, the voice of our community, is not a priority in government. And I believe that the elected member for our electorate should prioritise our voice, only our voice, not party politics, not big business, not donors, just the voice of our community. I have developed a set of principles and policy principles that I'm sharing now, and they have been informed by our conversations with the community. We had a survey up on the website at the beginning of the campaign, and from door knocking, speaking with people, we have listened to the concerns of our community. I do believe there is a disconnect between what we want and what decisions governments make. And I believe there is a better way of doing things, and we need to start doing that. I think we can easily take for granted the amazing system of representative democracy that we have, and it has to be treasured, it has to be protected, and that's why I'm standing. I do believe as an independent on the crossbench, you have enormous power to hold governments to account and to make sure there is transparency. An independent will ask questions that neither party want asked and certainly don't want to answer. We already see the effectiveness of our crossbench in New South Wales politics. We have Alex Greenwich, who has made enormous contributions with his voluntary assisted dying legislation, decriminalisation of abortion, and it was Alex Greenwich at the end of last year who flagged that gambling reform should be a matter of priority for this election. I know that our community want integrity in their political system and in government. And that is something that I am absolutely passionate about and the main reason why I'm standing. Neither of the major parties are shining in glory when it comes to integrity, and we deserve better. It is our public money, and these are decisions that are made for us. I think our political culture has become hardened around conflict, and it is all about cheap talking points and political games, rather than decisions made for us that impact our daily lives. New South Wales, all state government, take care of the most important things in our lives: our homes, our health, and our education. These must be prioritised for the good of the people in the electorate, not for somebody's career or big business. I understand from our community that climate change is incredibly important, and we need to be committed to faster action on climate change and protecting our unique biodiversity. We have a government that talks big on its climate change action, yet still continues to approve fossil fuel projects. We are not going to meet our emissions reductions targets if we keep approving fossil fuel projects. We also need to stop logging native forests and protect our unique biodiversity. I was absolutely floored by the statistic that in 2019, 34% of people in New South Wales had experienced multiple environmental disasters. We have communities that in northern New South Wales that are still displaced due to climate change, communities in regional New South Wales still dealing with the aftermath of the Black Summer fires. It is March. We had an almost 40-degree day yesterday, close to that today, and there are bushfires raging through New South Wales. We need to address the rising cost of living and affordable housing. We need to make sure there is a long-term strategic plan, not just make-do vouchers that increase inflation and a one-off stopgap measures. And I will push for a government to address the lack of social and affordable housing, and I will push for a faster move towards renewable energy to permanently lower power bills in New South Wales.
Thanks, Victoria. If you want to wind up, that'd be great.
I believe that a state member should listen and respond to the needs of the community. And we know we want a local member who will work collaboratively across levels of government and within Parliament. And that is what I aim to achieve.
Thank you so much, Victoria. And last, but obviously not least, is Anthony Roberts. Unmute Anthony. Click any. Just click any button. There you go.
You got me?
Yep, gotcha.
Look, thank you, Jackie, and in the Cove. I also would like to acknowledge the traditional owners upon whose land we meet this evening. I arrived in the electorate in 1982 and I've never wanted to leave. My wife, Alicia, is a local teacher. I met her at Hunters Hill SES and she's gifted me with 4 beautiful boys, John, Tom, Sam, and my 2.5-year-old Joe. I love this community and I love its people. Over the time I've spent here, I first started, originally, it's been drilled in me since I was born that with both my parents receiving the Order of Australia for their service to the community. I've served in Bougainville with the Army. I've been an accountant with Price Waterhouse as an auditor, served on Lane Cove Council and of course in the New South Wales Parliament. Can I say that I'm proud of the work that we're seeing in our schools with the upgrades, securing additional sporting amenities and better playing fields for our children. We've improved the access to the foreshore and upgraded the wharves. We've made the most out of Bedlam Bay and created new parks that are accessible so that everyone can play. We've got new scout halls, boat sheds and upgraded roads, and also restoring our heritage buildings has been a priority for me. And we've almost completed the remediation of the old Hunters Hill smelter site, which is already having positive impacts on this community. Look, the list goes on, but I can assure you the work continues. I made a decision a long time ago that I wanted to serve this community so that when I leave this place, I leave it better for our children and for the generations to come. I'm running out of time, but can I just say that, no matter if it's a state, federal, local issue, I know a government and I'm always here to help. And can I say the most crucial issue for me is very much ensuring that our children not only have the same opportunities as us, but they have more. And as I said, we leave this place better than it was. In terms of singular issues, there isn't just one, it's about balance. From some people, you'll hear singular issues with simplistic answers, but in essence, they need to be balanced with respect to the economy, the environment, jobs, and protecting our future. Whether that's balancing more homes with more open spaces, supporting renewable energy whilst maintaining jobs for our communities, or supporting the healthcare and educational sectors whilst ensuring our budget remains in surplus. And can I say I'm proud of how we've done this. We've kept people employed despite the pandemic, and we've kept the budget surplus despite the unprecedented devastation of our floods and fires. At the end of the day, there isn't just one issue that affects our future, it's all of them. And we have to get the balance right for the next generation and the generations to come. I want our children to be able to afford to live in this community. I want them to enjoy the same open space and to continue to have access to world-class education and healthcare. Paraphrasing from an old Greek saying, as I always say, a society grows great when people plant trees in whose shade they will never sit. So thank you, Jackie, for this opportunity tonight.
Thank you so much, Anthony. So now we're just going to go into our Q&A, and I'm just going to take it in order. And the first question is for Victoria. Victoria, who will you give your preference to, Labor or Liberals? And just to a little sidebar, today in the Cove chat, there was a big discussion about preference in the New South Wales optional preferences, and people are a bit confused. So not everyone understands how it works, and it is different from the federal system. Sorry, if you can.
Thanks. You need to take me off mute. Thanks, Jackie, and thanks, Corinne. To be clear, they're not my preferences, they're your preferences. I believe strongly and passionately in representative democracy. When you go into the ballot, it is your choice which numbers you put next to which name in each box. I have never voted according to how to vote in my life. I'm not going to start telling people how to do that. If you vote for me, you believe strongly in climate, integrity, and community, and I urge you to put all your preferences according to those values. So hopefully that answers that. Optional preferential voting, we are the only jurisdiction that has that. And I really encourage everybody to exercise the full extent of their vote by placing all numbers in every single box. Don't just give one vote to one party. No party, no candidate fully represents all your views. And I strongly encourage you to tell all of us what is important to you, and you do that by numbering every box.
Is there any other candidate who would like to have a comment about the preferential system?
Yeah, I endorse what Victoria has said. It's terribly important to number every box. The first past the post or just number one box system was introduced by the Liberals because it assists them, and you will be denying yourselves your democratic right to choose where your vote will go if your first preference is exhausted, that is, doesn't get to the level of the next person, and you haven't chosen a next person. So if you have chosen a next person and one after that, then your vote then dominoes off to those people. So by all means, you can do nothing other than one square, but I strongly encourage you to use your democratic right to choose where your vote will go after the first preference. And don't forget, there's also an upper house. Of course, we have three Greens candidates in the upper house, and of course, I strongly encourage you to vote Green in the upper house.
Great, thank you, Heather. Anybody else want to have a stay, or we move on? Oh, yes, Penny. Just hit anything on your keyboard.
Sorry about that. I didn't do it. So I agree. Absolutely, we should definitely be preferencing others on our ballot because your vote will exhaust. If you put somebody on there and they don't end up being in the last two, your vote doesn't go anywhere. It's useless. So please do preference others.
All right. Anthony, anything you'd like to say? No?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. What would you like to say about that?
Listen.
We can hear you. You're right.
You can hear me. Look, what occurs between you and your ballot paper is between you, whether you want to vote 1, 2, 3, or 4 in this case. So basically it comes down to choice, and I think that's very important.
Great. Okay, so we might stay with you, Anthony. There's a question for all the candidates regarding the environmental protection legislation. Alex has said, since the Coalition repealed the Native Vegetation Act in 2017, land clearing rates across the state have increased. As you know, much of the land marked to be cleared is habitat for several endangered species, including koalas. Along with this, the protection of feral species through the Wild Horse Heritage Bill. What measures will be taken to protect the state's biodiversity and ensure that the state of land clearing won't worsen? So if you want to start with you, Anthony.
Well, can I start by saying that over the past 4 years, we've added some 10,000 hectares or more to National Park. We committed almost 200 million to doubling the numbers of koalas by 2050. And our new strategy builds on the previous achievements of the New South Wales koala strategy, which gave some 45 million to that. And of course, we purchased more than 5,300 hectares of koala habitat to add to the National Park estate. We've set aside more than 8,900 hectares of state forests for koalas. And with respect to 17 private conservation agreements through the Biodiversity Conservation Trust, we covered another 2,800 hectares for priority koala habitat. With respect to trees, I was able to, as the former planning minister, introduce the 1 million trees planting within metropolitan Sydney, and we will continue to fund that, and we'll continue to grow on that.
Thank you, Anthony. Penny?
Am I muted? No, okay. So just to begin, I'll just say that the Labor will create a great koala national park on the mid-north coast of New South Wales and protect those wildlife corridors that are here in South Sydney. I actually went out to door knock the communities out at Warrenora, and what Labor will do, they've decided that that land, that it was Sydney waterland out there where it was koala habitat, they're going to give that land to national parks, so that will be saved forever. They'll complete a national parks establishment plan as part of the commitment to Australia, providing 30% of land protection by 2030. The koala strategy, we've also got the koala strategy is spending money, like you say, Anthony, but it's not actually saving koalas. Labor will refocus the New South Wales koala strategy to turn it into a comprehensive species recovery plan. And the Liberals and Nationals tore up environmental protections in 2016 and 17, which has actually led to an acceleration of land clearing. There's even more clearing in the pipeline, with a 1,300% increase of land clearing approvals compared to 2016. So after 12 years of removing environmental protections, increased rates of land clearing and the ongoing koala wars between the Liberals and the Nationals in New South Wales, the protection and status of koalas has gone from not threatened to vulnerable to endangered, with koalas now on track to extinction in New South Wales by 2050. Rather than having a clear avoid, minimise, offset hierarchy at its core, there were scathing reports by the Auditor General of New South Wales and the parliamentary inquiry into the integrity of the biodiversity offset scheme. So that's another can of worms, but as a result, the biodiversity offset scheme in New South Wales is riddled with complexity, conflicts of interest, lack of transparency, and inadequate market safeguards, and the lack of understanding from stakeholders.
Thank you, Pence. I think
Labor will get serious on this and make sure that we have a very rigorous report back on this, on the offsets.
Thank you. Heather.
I'm drafting in legislation here that the Liberals have passed with a view to weakening protections for state forests, for native forests, for any kind of natural reserves that isn't already developed. It's a disgrace. The 2016 Biodiversity Conservation Act does nothing other than allow those who own rural land to self-assess as to whether or not the habitat that they are about to destroy is of any value. They have been going ahead at a huge rate, willy-nilly, to ruin our natural environment, the private landowners, and that's been done with the blessing and the encouragement of the Liberal and National parties. This is a disaster for New South Wales. There is, of course, the Greens, of course, will oppose any further weakening and want to reinstate the kinds of controls we used to have, which are that you used to have actual, Department of Environment officers who turn up and say, no, you can't do that. But that's not happening anymore. Mr. Roberts, thank you for the comment, but this is the way to have government control of what's going on out there. You let landholders do what they want, you're going to get more destruction. The koala situation is complete hypocrisy. The Liberals, without 2023, they allowed developers, Lend-Lease, Ingham and other developers, to ruin the last remaining koala chlamydia-free population around Campbelltown, Mount Gilead and so forth, which is now covered with developments, roads, which are, of course, cars are running over koalas. It was beautiful, pristine land, which is now ruined by Lend-Lease's developments. And that was the last chlamydia-free population around Sydney, so it's gone. There hasn't been a koala seen in Shoalhaven for a long time. It's functionally extinct in Shoalhaven. We're heading down the path of disaster, but koalas are just the top of the tree. It's everything down to microbe level. They're just the emblematic species, but you can go to any other species. Flying foxes, terribly important, endangered, no habitat. It's all around New South Wales, this kind of destruction, and we will do our very best to stop this from happening and to change the legislation to introduce proper controls.
Thank you so much, Heather. Victoria.
Thanks, Jackie. Sorry, I keep putting myself on mute. It's just that we're open plan in this house and you don't need to hear people having dinner. Okay. So let's go back to the question, which was, after hearing everybody's responses, what are we doing about land clearing? Well, right now, the New South Wales government is allowing native forest logging at the rate of 14,000 hectares each year. That's equivalent to an area of 50 times the Sydney CBD. We need to stop logging native forests. We need to protect our biodiversity. The offset scheme is not fit for purpose. It is an accounting tool that is not built for protecting species. It is impossible to offset a species as endemic to a specific area. And we really are relying on an economic valuation of an ecosystem. It's far too easy for developers to meet their offset obligations through making a cash payment with no guarantee for like offsets. And it's very alarming that the Audit Office found that 96% of developer demand for species credits is not met by current supply. That alone shows that this scheme is not adequate for what it is set out to do. I will push for the end of native forest logging. I will push for the Audit Office and the New South Wales Parliamentary Legislative Council's inquiry into the integrity of the New South Wales Biodiversity Offset Scheme recommendations to be adopted.
Thank you so much. While I've got you, let's go on to the next question, which is about candidates who are going to commit to supporting nurses who work very hard for little money, they burn out, and that includes nurses in aged care. What would you do as a candidate to help this situation?
Yeah, I met with nurses yesterday, actually, and I support ratios. It is the only way we can ensure that we have the proper workforce for the necessary patient care. And that needs to be across all specialties, including mental health. That has quite a different requirement to other nursing specialties. And as we've seen anything through the last number of years, how important our mental health is and the care of and the provision of, more than adequate mental health to our community.
Thank you, Victoria. Heather.
Yes, I can't locate the specific policy. As you know, the Greens drown in policy. We've got so much stuff. But I'm sure we would be supportive of increased pay for nurses so that they can adequately be remunerated. But not just that, we need to have social and affordable housing so that the people who are servicing our every need can live in the communities where they work instead of having to commute dozens of kilometres every day because they can't afford to live anywhere near the hospitals and fire stations and other places of great importance to our everyday lives. We need to have a social and affordable housing construction boom, and it's got to be supported by government. We need to have other cost of living adjustments to assist people who are basically just doing it very tough. It's a disgrace that people are living in cars and children are living in cars and there's just inadequate support for them. The situation is dire and we need to get on with the housing situation as a matter of great urgency. And that's a state government responsibility as well as a federal government responsibility. It can't just be left to the feds, it must be done by the state. But of course we would support increased conditions and proper ratios, decent working conditions, not just for the nurses, but also proper conditions for the members of these organisations who are receiving the services, for the vulnerable, for the aged. We need to have proper care for them and not have that, revisit those awful scenes we saw when things were just so bad and people were dying and being abused. That needs to be stopped, nipped in the bud. Nurses do it tough. So do the fireys, so do teachers. A lot of people do it tough. We need to get on with the fundamentals, which is increasing the availability of affordable housing and reducing cost of living pressures.
Thank you, Heather. Penny.
Thank you. I agree with Heather on affordable housing. It's very important for our key workers to be able to live near where they work. I've also, Labor wants to stop nurses leaving the sector or leaving the state and leaving the sector. So Labor will abolish the public sector wage cap and will introduce enforceable minimum safe staffing levels. What the nurses are asking for is a 1 in 3 ratio in emergency departments and a 1 in 4 on the floor across all hospitals. And I support the nurses in this. It's incredibly important, not just for them, but for our safety, to have these safe staffing levels in our hospitals. And we don't want them to leave. We want them to stay in their jobs. So yes, I would definitely support the nurses. I saw them yesterday as well and made a pledge for them.
Thank you. Anthony.
Look, my mother was a registered nurse. I know how hard they work. I know how hard friends of ours who are in the hospital system, the health system, worked, particularly during COVID. This government has probably expended more money and invested more money in the health system than any government before. That's why we're able to remain open as a state, more or less, during COVID, and we responded in a very resilient way. And much thanks goes to our health staff, as well as the new hospitals we've been able to build because we managed the budget well. Can I say we'll continue to advocate, to ensure that our nurses and our hospital staff are able to work in the best circumstances. We will pay them what we can afford to pay them as a government through balance. But importantly, and Heather raised this, it is just not payment. There is a balance there by way of enabling our hospital staff, in fact, all our key workers, access to affordable housing. And that is a commitment of this government. And we've invested almost $3 billion in a housing package and strategy to enable a nurse, who, for example, lives on the Central Coast, and he has to catch a train for an hour or an hour and a half to get to his shift at the Royal North Shore. Well, that's frankly, it's not good enough. And we've put the policy platforms in place, and we're pulling the levers to ensure that those essential service personnel can live in our communities, and they shouldn't have to, travel an hour and a half to get to work.
Thank you, Anthony. So the next question is to all candidates, and I'm going to start with Penny this time. Penny, what would be your approach to the recommendations from the inquiry into music festivals and deaths, which recommended harm minimisation strategies like pill testing and sniffer dogs?
Okay, so I should fess up front that I actually sit on the Music Festival Roundtable into the safety of music festivals. So we come together regularly. It was a requirement of Parliament that we meet, and we have members from New South Wales Health, the police. We even went to Splendour this year in the mud, and we saw music festivals of the size that we've been studying under extreme pressure. So that was really good. In terms of pill testing, I would say the New South Wales Labor government will hold a drug summit. They're committed to that in its first term, to bring together health and medical experts, police, drug user organisations and families and other stakeholders to build a consensus on the way that we will deal with drug misuse. It needs a positive approach to drug policy after a decade of the Liberals and Nationals ignoring expert advice, really, on addiction. And the New South Wales government sat on a report from the Special Commission of Inquiry into the Drug ICE for almost 2 years, and have failed to deliver a whole of government policy approach on drugs and alcohol, and have chronically underfunded the critical treatment and prevention services. So a Labor government will listen to the experts and take a whole of government approach to issues relating to drug use, abuse, supply, law enforcement and treatment. So there isn't something specifically on pill testing in our policies, but that gives you a fair idea. And I would like to note that it's worth noting that previous Labor governments, previous Labor announcements have included commitment to trialling pill testing.
Thank you, Penny. Victoria.
Oh, yeah, well, I will be listening to the community to find out what the Land Cove community wants in regard to pill testing, but it will be based on evidence-based research. So I will listen to the experts to find out what is the best approach to this, and also refer to our community to find out what is our community need in regard. I'm not an expert in this, and I don't pretend to be, and I am not the voice of our community's entire electorate. I'm here just to represent that.
Anthony.
For me, it's the safety of people who attend these parties should be first and foremost in our minds. We have responded to the ICE inquiry, and I'm happy to share that at the end of this. Jackie will upload a link to that.
Right.
But again, these are sometimes complex issues. I know the police have their position, as do some health authorities. But again, it comes down to ensuring that if your child goes to, Splendour, you want them to come home safely, and we'll do everything in our power to ensure that occurs.
Thank you. And Heather?
Yes, well, pill testing is very desirable, more than desirable, necessary. Pill testing is not just for the testing of the pills, it's for the education of those who turn up to have their pills tested. It's for the referral of those people to further resources. We need to address this drug issue as a medical issue. Kids are going to take drugs, no stopping them. And that's going to be a harmful activity for many of them. We need to stop this punitive, criminalising attitude towards drug taking, treat it as a preventative medical problem. Those who have serious issues need to have medical assistance, and it's not just a question of saying don't take drugs. That's just ridiculous. That will do nothing. So we certainly support any measures that can mitigate the harm and damage that individuals suffer from their use of drugs on a reckless basis. Kids, of course, don't know what they're taking, you know, the stuff that they buy, who knows what's in it. So, and they would like to know what's in it, and they're fully entitled to know what's in it. So I think pill testing is a great idea. And support services, you know, have drug and alcohol DNA people there at the music festivals so that anybody who wants to talk about their problems or their issues or just make inquiries or whatever can go and talk to somebody. It's a great opportunity for extending services out into the community. Not just young people, everybody goes to these music festivals except me. Yeah, I really think that it's a question of providing resources, providing assistance and medicalising rather than treating it like a criminal justice issue. It shouldn't be that way.
Thank you, Heather. Okay, hot topic now. This is to all the candidates. How will you address the lack of buses and the public transport pain points that have been plaguing Lane Cove ever since Busways took over and our buses got privatised? It's become a nightmare trying to travel to and from the city. For a suburb that relies on buses for public transport, this is a terrible situation. Let's start with Victoria this time.
Yeah, it is a terrible situation. We are a bus-dependent electorate. Other than the people who are fortunate enough to live near ferries, we are completely reliant on buses. And we didn't get a nice announcement about the privatisation of buses. It happened a year ago. And then on the 27th of January this year, new bus timetables came in. And that is from then that we're experiencing delays, full buses or cancelled services. When I have been door knocking and speaking to people in the plaza, this comes up, I would say, 8 out of 10 times. It is a huge issue and we need to address it. I know that we are 30% down in drivers at Ryde and at Willoughby. That is clearly going to make a massive difference to our services. We need reliability of services for all routes and all times. I also understand that bus drivers had their pay cut by 20%. Now, it is impossible to provide a service with 30% down in drivers if you are not paying people accordingly. So it seems to me that the bus privatisation has not worked. We know that the New South Wales parliamentary inquiry said that it was a disaster. If something is so valuable that it is worth selling, then it is valuable enough to keep. And I will be working with the next New South Wales government to ensure that our bus services are returned to what they were. If we're going to meet our emissions reductions targets, we need effective public transport. It needs to be clean. We're not going to get clean buses until 2047, but it needs to be clean and it needs to be efficient.
Thanks, Victoria. Anthony.
Look, the issue with bus drivers, particularly post-COVID, is not just a state issue, but a national issue. It's an international issue. Many of those drivers did not return to work after COVID because they found employment either as couriers or truck drivers that gave them a different level of pay potentially, but also a different lifestyle. We have been working, and I want to apologise to everyone. I mean, my son has missed out on buses. I've had buses run late trying to get into town. So I want to thank everyone for their patience, and I understand their frustration, and I share that. We've been working very closely with Busways. So we've come up with now, between Tim, James and myself, a 4-point plan that we are delivering to assist in sorting this issue out. And the first of that is providing a free Opal card to enable drivers to travel to and from work free of charge. Secondly, the waiving of licence application fees and so forth for drivers that want to enter into the profession. Thirdly, we'll be undertaking a overseas recruitment drive, and we're working together with the federal government on that to recruit drivers into New South Wales. And finally, most importantly, is setting in stone a process and a mechanism for community feedback as to what services they want, and also for better ideas and just effectively sorting out those communications, Jackie, that both you and I at times found frustrating with Busways. So there is a way forward. There is a problem, we understand that, and we intend doing our very best to fix it.
Thank you. Heather, you're just going to have to hit your keyboard because you're making a bit of sound there. So, yep, great.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, essential services like buses should not be run by private companies. This has been happening over the last 2 decades, that the government, the Liberal National Government and Labor governments have been progressively selling off our public transport and our road network. And the result's been a transport system that's about how much profit the private sector can extract from what should be an essential public service, to the detriment of all of us. I also have been waiting for buses for quite a long time. So we are going to, in the balance of power, prevent any further privatisation of our essential public assets and services, and reverse the privatisation of the bus network by reintroducing a state-owned bus operator to take over privatised services once the contractual arrangements expire. On the subject of railway, not relevant to Lane Cove, but nonetheless important to New South Wales, we would abolish tahe, which has been nothing other than an accounting rort to try to get debt off books, so the government doesn't actually disclose its true budgetary situation. And we would introduce regulations to prevent private toll road operators from charging punitive administration fees, and work to reverse the restrictive tolling contracts previous governments have locked us into. So basically, we're about bringing it back into public hands and stopping this private profiteering at public expense.
Thank you, Heather. Penny.
So Labor, of course, will increase access to affordable and reliable transport. We'll invest in better public transport and put an end to privatisation of these essential services. Somebody mentioned the Upper House inquiry report, which recommended that and found that the private model has led to an absolute decline in the quality of transport services. And we will establish an industry task force to assess all of the report's findings and work to improve bus services for passengers right across New South Wales. I was down at a bus stop on Epping Road this morning, and I've been doing bus stops for the last couple of weeks. We saw a man wait half an hour for a bus this morning. We saw a couple of 288s fly past full, and they don't just do it there, as someone mentioned before, it's much further back. Like I've tried to catch buses in East Ryde, the 288, and they've been full there. So there are major issues. They come at the wrong times. There's a man showed us a timetable of the 285 Mars bus and Mars Road bus, and there's a gap of 30 minutes between 7:45 and 8:15 at peak demand times. So it's just not good enough. I think Victoria might have spoken to the same person I did on the mall last week. A bus driver came up to us and said that ride depots lost 25 drivers last week. So it wasn't the pandemic, it was drivers leaving. And the Willoughby depots lost, he said, there were 313 to begin with, and now there's only 200 bus drivers there. So that's a big loss of bus drivers. It's clear to everybody that privatisation does not work, and this needs to be addressed. And as I said, Labor will put together a task force and look at those recommendations that were put forward as a result of that inquiry. And we'll stop selling our motorways to private for-profit companies and instead deliver toll relief. We'll introduce a $60 a week toll cap, road tolls.
Well, you just segued into another question, which I think is probably important to do right now. And this is from Will. To all candidates, do you support the privatisation of Sydney Water or other government assets? And really, this is a yes or no type of answer. So just quickly, do you support? Oh, unfortunately, we can't see that for some reason. You must have been too close to the camera.
It says, I pledge never to privatise Sydney Water. Penny Patterson, Labor candidate.
Okay. Well, I think that's pretty obvious then. Anthony?
Absolutely not.
Right. Heather?
No, absolutely not. I'd reiterate what Mr. Roberts has said.
Right. And Victoria?
I do not support the privatisation of Sydney Water.
And can I just add, Jackie, though, the Premier did say that the government has said before that they won't privatise things, And we were just talking about the privatisation of buses that they promised never to do. I really don't believe that they are not going to privatise Sydney Water. They had two of their candidates at a candidates, we've got a video of it, two of their candidates at a meet the candidates, and they were asked to do exactly what you just did then, and two of them said yes. So I really don't believe it. It is going to be detrimental to our waterways. And I know Anthony loves our waterways as well, but if overflows and Sydney water infrastructure is privatised, it puts our waterways at risk of overflows. And I'm on the Parramatta River catchment group, and I know what happens when there is a failure. There's fish kills, all sorts of things can go wrong. And of course, it puts us way back on delivering on the Parramatta River master plan. So I think it's incredibly important that it stays in private hands. And I don't completely believe that the government will not privatise Sydney Water.
Would you like the right of reply, Anthony, on that?
I'm sorry. Oh no, just correction. I think you meant it will remain in public hands, not private hands.
Sorry, in public hands, yes.
I don't want you to have one of those Wallandilly moments.
No, of course not. No.
The coalition doesn't have a monopoly, though, on the privatisation assets.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is for all candidates again. It's a two-part from Claire. What are your approaches to the balance of the instalment of electric vehicle charging points? And additionally, what are your plans to decommission existing petrol stations? So we might start with Heather this time.
Sorry, I'm just replying to an individual on the chat. Yes, well, EVs. EVs are a bit complex, aren't they? I mean, it's wonderful that they don't emit, but they only don't emit if they're being charged with renewable energy. So if you're just going to plug into coal-powered electricity, then it's not that much a net gain. And of course, they also take resources in forms of the various heavy metals, what's the term? Rare earth metals and so forth that they use for the battery production. Nonetheless, it's an improvement on continuing to spew out substandard quality petrol, which is what we have in Australia because we don't have adequate petrol standards. Yes, we need charging stations, and we need to have publicly funded charging stations. We need governments to provide charging stations. I note that there's a bit of an issue with people parking in the charging spots that's in shopping centres. It's called icing or something, right?
Yes, I just wrote an article about it this week, but the new penalties of up to $2,000 have been introduced.
So people will get severely wrapped over the knuckles for doing that, but we need to have, obviously, infrastructure. People aren't going to be able to drive across the Nullarbor in EVs. We're still going to have to use some kind of fossil fuel-based vehicle, or just get on the Indian Pacific and not use a car would be a better outcome. Just use public transport. But nonetheless, where we can, there needs to be a proper network of charging stations around New South Wales provided by the government. This needs not just private industry to do it, or if it's private industry, they need subsidies. There needs to be a collaboration here between public-private enterprise.
Thank you. Victoria.
Yeah, we have lost time in building that network and that infrastructure that is necessary. We are fastly catching up, but we need to catch up even quicker to be able to have that network of charging stations around New South Wales. I'd just like to say that it seems to me that a lot of the approach of this current government to renewables is aimed at freestanding owner-occupier houses, where it is easy to put in solar and easy to put in charging. And what we're forgetting here is renters, and we're forgetting people in strata and apartment living. Any of us who've lived in a strata environment know how hard it is to get things through. Imagine trying to get through an EV charging in your garage in a strata environment. We need to have an approach that covers all types of dwellings, whether that be community batteries, community charging stations, so that everybody has access to this technology, not just people in freestanding single owner occupier houses. In regard to petrol stations, in the west of the electorate, there is a deficit of petrol stations right now. In fact, when I've been door knocking, that is something that comes up, the lack of services. So whether these petrol stations are already feeling the pinch and are closing down, whether they will transition. This is something we need a long-term plan over, instead of just a haphazard approach and people having to work out, where their services are being provided. This is the role of government, to help guide through a really important transition. We are moving into a green economy. This is the role of government. It is like we are rebuilding economy after the war. And I expect the government to take a far greater strategic role in this transition than what is currently occurring.
Whoops. Penny, how would you go with that?
I need to tell you all, I drive an electric vehicle, and I know that it is difficult, particularly when I'm driving for long distances. I said I have the cheapest, one of the cheapest EVs on the market, so my range isn't as enormous as a Tesla, for example. So I do have to be very cautious I do get range anxiety sometimes when I'm driving to Canberra, for example. What I'm finding is that there's all these Teslas on the road who have their own dedicated charging stations in certain points, but they don't use them anymore because apparently they get 2 years free and then suddenly they have to pay. So they come to the other public stations, sometimes the NRMA ones, which are free, the DC charges. And that's where I think we need to look. We need to look more at DC charges, the fast charging. I know we have one at the Canopy in Lane Cove, which is fantastic to have it there, but we have the free solar driven charging in the Canopy as well. So hats off to Lane Cove Council for that, for getting that organised. But I think that's what we need to look more to, is delivering. I know both parties, both the major parties have committed funding to delivering more DC charging, but it has to happen quick. We have to have it out there faster. I mean, I was meant to go to a meeting in Forbes recently and I didn't. I wanted to drive my electric vehicle, and I found that there were a whole heap of DC chargers being built, and they've been being built for some time, but we need many more of them so people will uptake more EV. And I agree in terms of flats retrofitting, there's opportunities that exist here. I've always said this, in electrifying everything, there are huge opportunities for retrofitting, and I think that people in flats, we've seen a couple of examples. I think the first one came out in the inner west just last week, where there was a power pole charger that's been erected. I think there are problems with local government that all needs to be ironed out as well, with local governments finding space on our roads for charging, but that can all be ironed out. And I think with good planning and good policy, we can make it happen quicker.
Thank you. Anthony.
Well, it's a good question, and I'm pleased to say we've ironed it out. I recently updated the Transport and Infrastructure State Environmental Planning Policy. So in addition to installing chargers in places such as homes, as we mentioned, car parks, petrol stations, and car washing facilities, those chargers can now be placed on power and light poles, public administration buildings, street furniture, including street signs, benches, parking meters, and telephone booths, without having to go through the normal DA approval. So what we've done is we've come over the top of councils. We've actually moved around councils that have made arrangements through in a monopoly sort of way with street furniture individuals. So basically, you'll be able to put a charger on a telephone pole out the front of your house. It's just, we've opened it up. It's happening, and we're driving forward. And that's not just, as Penny said, the amount of money that both Liberal and Labor and this government has committed to putting into the creation of sort of larger charging facilities. So basically, it's all open. I'll put this up a bit later on, the press release for it. But again, this is just making the ability for people to access chargers close to home, and not have to worry about sort of having to wait for someone to move their V8 outside the Tesla parking station.
Just an unashamed plug for In the Cove. I've just written an article on this exact point, and Lane Cove Council has signed up to do a deal where there will be the charging stations on power poles throughout Lane Cove. So that's a positive step, because I can't tell you the number of photos that people send in to me every day going, that person's parked in an EV and they shouldn't be. Mind you, EV people shouldn't park when they're not charging as well. Okay, so this one is to the three other candidates, and then there's a special question for you, Anthony, but to all candidates except Anthony, if you'd been in government for the last decade, what would you have done differently than the current one? So just give us one big thing that you would do differently. Victoria.
Stop new coal and gas projects.
Great. Heather.
Stop coal and gas and transition to sustainable energy.
Penny.
Well, I have to agree with them because I'm an activist within our party, but I'm not saying that would have been Labor's policy. Me personally, I would like to have seen that myself. I'd also would have been much further ahead on what we were just talking about on EV charging. It's been in the pipeline for so long, people telling us from Europe and other parts of the world that it's going to be a tsunami as soon as they get cheaper, and we're going to be inundated with cars and we're not going to have the infrastructure in place. So I would have done that. I wouldn't have privatised poles and wires. I wouldn't have privatised our buses. There are so many things that I would have done differently were I in government while this government was there. But in any case, we might have our opportunity come March 25.
Thanks, Penny. And Anthony, if you were the leader of the state, what would you have done differently in the last decade?
Well, when you're in government, there are many decisions that you make. Sometimes you don't get them all right, but I think you need to make decisions to move on, and learn. If I'd been leader, I think we would have probably not gone ahead with the proposed council amalgamations. I've got to say that's probably, if I look back and I have a look at all our successes, if there was one, I think, failed piece of policy, it was the council amalgamations.
Yeah.
If I can be really frank.
Thanks. And while I've got you, Anthony, there's a specific question to you. With high inflation and cost of livings, will Liberal government undertake to lift the salary cap for essential workers to enable them to afford housing close to where they work, which I think we touched on before, but if you want to say anything extra, feel free to do so.
Look, we touched on that before. Look, we are committed to ensuring our key workers can live in our communities. And that's why we've invested almost $3 billion in our housing package, which you wouldn't be able to do, mind you, if you didn't have that balance between balancing the books and managing the economy. And that's how we've been able to essentially build the infrastructure, the new schools, the hospitals, invest in the state, ensure that small businesses were able to get through the pandemic. That's because we manage the economy well, and we are coming into some very strong headwinds. Cost of living is going to be massive, and that's why I believe that the coalition government is best suited in the best position to manage these headwinds and I've got to say, some pretty dire economic circumstances coming down the pipeline.
Thank you. I've got a question to all candidates, but this person had specifically said they wanted to start with you, Anthony. How are you going to overcome the failings of the system of privately appointed principal certifying authorities, which create an unsatisfactory situation where Lane Cove Council DA consent conditions can be overridden by a PCA where it determines that the condition has been met, even if it hasn't? And the LCC has no power to enforce these conditions because the certifier has equal or superior standing. So really, in a nutshell, people aren't happy with the private certifier system. What would you do to help out the system?
Yeah, look, I don't think anyone's, except some private certifiers, are happy with the system. We're working with the building commissioner. We're looking at actually working with councils as well to have a taxi rank of certifiers. So we need to remove those certifiers that seem to be gaming the system with, home builders, and get them out of the system. I've got to say there is an argument for private certification, but it needs to be managed, and it certainly needs to be regulated. And those people, the cowboys, need to be removed from the industry. And if we can do that by giving council more powers, as to have a list of 30 private certifiers, for example, on a taxi rank because they are good certifiers, then I think that's a great way forward.
Okay, Penny, would you like to make a statement about principal certifying authorities?
Well, I can tell you, I'm a local government councillor, so I get complaints daily about private certifiers. And, it boils down to taking powers away from councils. I know this government took local planning powers from councils in 2018, and they gave them to a paid panel of 3 handpicked consultants and 1 community consultant for each meeting. And these guys are paid unelected people making decisions on the shape of our cities. As far as private certifiers go, as far as Labor goes on policy, I would have to take that on notice. But I will say I know that people are very unhappy. I know that we're losing a lot of tree canopy as a result of private and complying development and private certifiers. It's certainly something that has to be looked at. I know that Labor has in its platform, and this is something I keep going back to, that planning in New South Wales involves the consideration of the state, regional and local levels, but local issues should be determined at the local level by democratically elected governments.
Thank you. Heather, I think it might be your dog who's enjoying a nice little...
I thought that was a person.
I think it's Heather's dog. She's muted, so can you just unmute? Just hit any button.
Mute.
Yeah, there you go.
Good. Yeah, sorry, it was my dog. Yeah, he's cranky about me shutting him out. There's nothing good about private certification. I don't know which one is not a cowboy. I live in Boronia Park. We've got a lot of complying development, which in itself is bad enough because it completely shuts out council, shuts out everybody. None of us know what's going on. It might have been all right if it had been council who was the certifying authority at complying development, but it's not. It's cowboys. There's a particular one who's being used around here. You see the same name up everywhere. You ring up, there's nobody there. Maybe he's some, gym junkie from Bondi. We don't know who they are, but they never answer the calls. There was a decent one once. He got out. He couldn't stand the developer, so he got out anyway. But, this is just Rafferty's rules. Do what you like, but that's privatisation. Of course, the Liberals will call it cutting red tape and allowing the private enterprise system to do its best because private enterprise does everything better. That is rubbish. This is serious. This is people's money, people's houses, our environment. This is a serious degradation of our environment, and these certifiers are a very large part of that problem. Sorry, I'll just have to shut the dog up.
It's okay. Heather, Victoria.
Right. Yes, the lack of community consultation and the ability for community to review these developments is something I'm hearing a lot from our community. People are very concerned about these very large houses being built next door to them. They are technically compliant, but they don't fit in with the streetscape. The fact that these decisions have been taken away from the local community, it's incredibly concerning, and we need to get that power back. There are many ways we can do this, and I will be working with the government to ensure that is the needs of the community that are met in development, not the needs to streamline a process so much. I think that there just seems to be this continual flaw with thinking the private sector will always have the right answer and will be the most efficient and best way to sort things out. As I said before, the state government controls very important things in our lives, our homes, where we live, our relationships with our neighbours, incredibly important. Have you ever had a bad relationship with your neighbour due to a building development that occurred next door? This kind of thing impacts people's daily lives, and we need to prioritise a way to ensure that there is a more consultative process where people feel that they have a say in it rather than being imposed upon them.
Thank you so much. Well, we've just got one last question because we're running out of time. So I apologise if I haven't got to your question. And then just after we finish off with this question, if everyone would like to just do a 2-minute summation as to giving us their last words, so to speak, that'd be great. So the last question is, what will each of you do to pledge to protect the transgender youth in our community? And while you're there, Victoria, might as well start with you.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I'm incredibly concerned about our New South Wales Anti-Discrimination Act. It currently does not protect bisexual people against discrimination. It doesn't protect religious schools discriminating against LGBTQI students, and it doesn't protect non-binary and intersex people from discrimination. In fact, New South Wales is really lagging behind the rest of the country in terms of our anti-discrimination laws. They are outdated and they need long overdue reform. And I will be working, well, in fact, I know that Alex Greenwich is putting together a package to reform these, and I will be working with him to ensure that we have greater principles of equity and inclusion in our community to ensure that the most vulnerable are protected.
Thank you. Heather.
Yeah, I completely endorse Victoria's comments, but stopping discrimination against these vulnerable people, particularly youngsters who are going through the experience, trying to work out their identity, is one aspect, but the other aspect is the support system for them. We need to have proper school counsellors trained in this particular area to be able to give advice and support to kids within schools, because parents don't always support this transition or this identity. So we need to have other social supports in place to come at it from both angles, not just removal of discrimination, which is terribly important, and I agree with Victoria there, but also to support those people in their transition. My daughter's a school teacher up near Kyogle, and she personally takes a lot of these kids under her wing and assists them in various ways to try to progress if the parents aren't able to do so. And it will be a whole community effort and a recognition that communities are involved in changing attitudes toward this. So there needs to be education campaigns as well. It's a broad social issue.
Thank you. Penny.
Yes, I agree with everything that's been said. Look, I went on the march across the bridge for the end of World Pride on Sunday, and it was a very uplifting and beautiful experience. There were families there, and it was something we were all doing together, and there was acceptance, and it was all around a really beautiful event. And well done, Sydney, for handling those crowds. A Minns Labor government will ban, this is really important, this sends a very strong message, will ban LGBTQ plus conversion practices in New South Wales. I can't believe that they still exist. The so-called conversion therapy or suppression practices is the formal or informal practices based on the ideology that these people have a disorder or require treatment. Minister for Health Brad Hazzard indicated he would introduce a prohibition in 2019, but the New South Wales government has taken no further action since. So we would prohibit the practice and will work with survivors and all other stakeholders to develop the legislation so that it works in New South Wales. We'll establish a joint working group of New South Wales Health and the New South Wales Department of Justice to draft the laws. Further to that, Labor has committed 17 million to funding the Children's Kids Helpline. Further increases, an increase to the Children's Helpline capacity to reduce and respond to more children, to respond to more children and young people in New South Wales and support more young people in deeper and more meaningful ways. So there is a real gap there with funding. We desperately need more funding for the helpline and anything that we can do. I think Headspace was, we had to use Headspace for our teams at one point during COVID, and they were inundated. And so I think the last couple of years have really put a lot of pressure on these helplines and on those people who are responding to at-risk teens. So I think it's really important that that money goes there.
Thank you. And Anthony.
Look, this government has invested some 2.3 million to support trans and gender diverse groups. We'll continue to work with Alex and the Greens as well as the Labor Party to ensure that what comes before Parliament is a piece of legislation that actually does what it's supposed to do.
Great. Okay, so thank you so much, everybody. And again, apologise if I didn't get to your questions. So now we're just going to allow people to do a little 2-minute summation, and we're going to go in the reverse order that we had this to start with. So Anthony, if you want to sum up in 2 minutes, that would be great.
Yes, no, look, first and foremost, again, Jackie in the Cove, thank you very much for hosting tonight. To the other candidates, thank you as well for joining with us in such a wonderful manner. I think it's been a very constructive conversation. And as I said before, look, we live very much in a fantastic community with just absolutely fantastic people. And I think we're coming very much into, as I said, some strong economic headwinds. We've always got to be mindful that I've just taken over the Reconstruction Authority, for example, because I've got nothing else to do. And that is about building resilience in communities, but not just engineering resilience and hardening those communities through engineering and building back better, but also socially. COVID has been a difficult time for so many people. And as we're coming out of COVID, we have to make sure that we don't leave anyone behind. So to everyone that's joined us tonight, thank you for your time. And I look forward to catching up with you over the next few weeks at least.
Thanks, Anthony. Victoria.
Yes, thanks, Jackie. Really appreciate being able to speak tonight, and thank you, Heather, Penny and Anthony. I'm taking a stronger stance on gambling reform than either of the major parties. The Liberal national policy doesn't come into full effect until 2028, and I believe we have a remarkable opportunity to finally loosen the control of the gambling industry on this state by doing something at this election. I would also like to tackle the growing and increasingly concerning rise of vaping in our young people. It needs federal and state work, and it's complex, but it can be done. I would say that if this economy has been managed so well, why are our schools chronically underfunded, and why are essential workers not being paid wages that they are able to live within the city? We have wage caps that mean that there is a housing affordability crisis, and we have a growing number of homelessness. I'm very concerned about homelessness rising in older women, and we need to address that. And after 12 years of a Liberal national government, we are facing a cost of living crisis. And we need more than stopgap measures. We need a long-term plan, and we need to move as quickly as possible to renewable energy to permanently lower our power bills.
Thank you so much. Heather.
Yes, well, I'm looking forward to a government with integrity, a government that isn't just about taking money away from poor people and giving it to rich people. I'm looking for social equity, for inclusion, for, at last, environmental action. We need to transition. It's urgent. I'm looking for a whole raft of changes in our next government, away from this tired old, same old stuff. We need a whole new industrial revolution to transition. We need a whole new attitude towards the provision of services. It's not just about things as they are. We can't just keep on looking after rich people and allowing them the privileges they've had. We need to have social housing, health, education, all properly supported. This needs to be done as a matter of urgency. We need to change the balance towards looking after people and giving people a say, particularly in planning, but also in many other areas of government. So it needs to have pretty radical change over the next few years.
Thank you. And last, Penny.
Thank you. I mentioned vaping before. We do have a policy on vaping. In the immediate term, New South Wales Labor supports the implementation of e-cigarette detectors in common vaping spaces, and they will host a roundtable on smoking and vaping in schools within the first year of government. So just in regards to that. So a lot was said by some of the other candidates about their dedication to climate action. It drives me. That is who I am. Within our party, I am an activist, and I push for stronger action on climate, and I'm constantly part of campaigns to reduce land clearing. So it's something that does drive me. I will always push for progress on climate action, emissions reduction, and the reduction of land clearing. And I'm a big proponent of the circular economy. I can see so many of the the things that we could do, you know, manufacture here in Australia out of mining waste. And I think it's really important that we take a good hard look at that. And I take that with me if I'm elected to Parliament. It doesn't go away from me. It's in the back of every decision I make. I look at sustainability and how it will help us reach net zero. I'm always knocking on the doors of our Labor MPs. It's not going to be any different if I go to Parliament. And I certainly won't stop. And I understand, this has got to be said, I do understand modelling and making sure how you get from A to B before you promise targets, making sure that you can deliver without leaving whole regions of people and families behind. And that does not mean I won't keep, that I will keep the climate crisis. It will be centre of everything I decide to do going forward. It always will be. Labor will legislate emissions targets. They will legislate emissions targets, and they will establish a net zero commission to monitor and review our progress, its impacts on jobs and industry, as well as energy prices, but also keeping an eye on where we can move faster. So that's incredibly important, and we will end the privatisation of our energy assets and create a state-owned clean energy corporation to deliver cleaner and more reliable energy. So that's really my big thing personally. And we've got this fantastic Fresh Start plan. We're going to have better healthcare, affordable housing. We're going to fix transport, and we're going to stop out all of our workers, our public sector workers, leaving the sector or leaving the state or the country. We've got to make sure they're paid properly, they have safe working conditions, which makes it much better for us as patients in our hospital, much better for our children when they go to school. And of course, we've got to address affordable housing, and that's something we've got a really good plan to do. Please have a look at the Fresh Start plan and delve down and look at the detail. It's been thought through. And there is money there for it. It just is coming from a different place. So please have a look at our plan.
Thank you so much. Just a final thank you to all the candidates for being so available and coming out tonight. Oh, in your living room. Some people said they had some problem with the sound. Don't worry, we're recording this and it will be on our website and on YouTube. And sorry again if I missed some of your questions. It's really hard to get them all in, but I think we got to the ones where people have also brought them up to me in the street as well. So thank you everyone for the candidates, for all those amazing people who came along and listened, and to my moderators and Mr. RTC. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thanks, Jackie.
Thank you.
Bye.